Recently, we've been trying our best to give some time to companies that are working in the space industry to find out exactly what it is they're doing, and this episode is another one of those.
Yep, so today we're talking to Tony Frego, VP of Mission Management for Spaceflight Inc., the Uber of space. If you've got a payload, they want to deliver it.
Yes, if you could send something to space, what would it be? Let us know. Oh boy. Let us know via our social media pages at Space and Things 1 on Twitter and at Space and Things Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, or via the contact form on our website.
And please consider joining us on Patreon. Find out how by visiting patreon.com/Space and Things. But right now, enjoy episode 118 of the Space and Things podcast.
Oh my God. Unbelievable.
You're listening to Space and Things with Dave Giles and Emily Carney.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 118 of the Space and Things podcast.
We recorded this episode a couple of weeks ago in anticipation of the two of us being a little bit busy. This week, I'm in New Mexico for the next Celestis launch.
And I flew across the pond to visit some air and space museums in the US before heading to Hutchinson, Kansas to go to a huge celebratory event for the 50th anniversary of Apollo 17, where I'll be meeting Emily in person for the very first time.
Which is quite a big deal for both of us since we've been doing this for nearly 2.5 years.
Yeah,
that it's nuts. It is. Anyway, fortunately, we were organized enough to have some episodes prepared for you while we're busy. And this week, we're having a look at satellite delivery and deployment with Tony Frego, the VP of Mission Management of Spaceflight Inc.
So without any further ado, let's crack on with the interview and figure out what this company does and why it's important.
Do we see you waving? Hey, this is great. Hello, Mom. We see you, Rod. Looking great. Okay. Hey, John. How you doing?
All right. So welcome, Tony. Thank you so much for joining us on Space and Things. So before we get on to Spaceflight Inc., let's learn a little bit about you. So how did you end up at an aerospace company, and when did space become a big deal for you?
First of all, thanks for having me on. It's an honor. Yeah, I guess when I think back about, kind of how I got into the space industry, I've always been fascinated with space, with constellations, looking at the stars, and it sounds maybe a little bit too on point, but kind of interested in the thought that we're not alone out there. I had an uncle who we affectionately called the Time Lord. He always talked about traveling back and visiting the dinosaurs or traveling in the future. So sci-fi has always kind of been a part of the lexicon in my life. Star Wars, Star Trek, reading 2001 at a very young age was all very interesting to me. Once I got a little bit older, was thinking about careers. I liked airplanes. I liked science. I liked math. I guess the engineer choice was, well, those three together mean I need to be an engineer, and I probably should be an aeronautical engineer. And so I went to school at Western Michigan University, nearby where I grew up. I got an aeronautical engineering degree, and one of my close friends there knew of a company called ATK, which you all might now know as Northrop Grumman. They were Orbital ATK for a little while, but the ATK that I went and became part of built the solid rocket boosters for the space shuttle. Mm-hmm. And so that was what truly kind of got me started in the space industry field. And so I was a nozzle design engineer at ATK in Utah, and I did probably one of the cooler things I worked on was post-fire disassembly work. So you guys and your listeners are probably familiar that the solid rocket boosters for the shuttle would splash down after launch. They would be towed back to port, and what we would do is we would actually travel down there to Florida, review all of the rockets and the components, and make sure that they performed as expected. And as a 21, 22-year-old fresh out of college, I mean, it was such a cool opportunity to be part of that. Obviously, the shuttle program ended. I took my talents over to a company called Aerojet, which is located not too far away from where spaceflight is now, and worked in space propulsion for them. I was the project manager for a 200-pound biprop product
Wow.
line. And so a little bit of got kind of the first picture of getting into orbit with the solid rocket boosters. And then Aerojet was the view of what do you do when you're in orbit, whether it's an apogee or a thrust vectoring type nozzle. So that was a little bit about how I got into there. And then after Aerojet, I had an opportunity here at Spaceflight. A2K and Aerojet were both great companies. They gave me a lot of the experience that I use today. I really wanted to work for a smaller company. I wanted to work for some place where I felt like my contributions truly mattered. I also wanted to work on products that I could kind of see from cradle to grave. So
Nice, yeah.
as part of the work that I do right now, I first start to engage with customers even before contract signing. Sometimes it's before they even have the spacecraft built. Sometimes it's a paper spacecraft at that point, so to speak, and getting to work with them, across months and years, meeting with them at the launch site for integration, being there with them and talking with them as the spacecraft gets launched, and hearing back from them that they've made comms on orbit is a really, really cool experience. Being able to see it from beginning to end, and so that's something that I really do enjoy here at Spaceflight.
You've talked a little bit about this. Obviously now you work for Spaceflight. You've worked at ATK and stuff like that, sort of more, I guess, publicly visible companies, more corporate type spaceflight companies. Yeah. So really, what spurred the creation of Spaceflight Inc?
I've been at Spaceflight now for 6 years. It feels like a very long time in space years, but the company was actually created in, I believe, 2011. And it was really created to address a need in the market to launch small satellites into orbit. The way that it used to be done was very costly. There weren't very many launches. There weren't very many opportunities for customers to get launched into orbit if you weren't a big primary satellite. And what Spaceflight wanted to do was to change that. We wanted to find ways to shoehorn these small satellites into launches that may have excess capacity. And so we worked with a lot of different launch vehicle providers very early on to say, hey, do you have 10 kilograms, 15 kilograms available, and someplace that you can fit a 3U deployer or a 6U deployer? It's not that much. You're launching 2,000 kilograms to orbit. We're only asking for 15. And we would go out there and try to usually pioneer a way to find a home for these small satellites. That was really what got Spaceflight started, is a need in the market to get these small satellites launched where there really wasn't a good avenue to do that. And, what we've done from there is taken it to across many, many LVs in the marketplace, and going so far as to offering dedicated rideshare missions like we did on SSOA, where we bought an entire Falcon 9 and launched 64 satellites there. That was kind of taking the extreme version of that. But that's how Spaceflight kind of found its way in the market.
Yeah. You advertise yourself as the Uber of space. And when I first heard that, I thought, I can download an app and book myself a ride to come and pick me up and take me into space. But obviously I know that's not how it works, but that would be pretty cool. But how does this Uber of space thing work? How does that manifest for your clients?
So first of all, on the app idea, I think it's great. I really do think we should continue down that train of thought. I was thinking about it this morning. The other major differentiator I would say is currently we don't offer any human space flight, but it's not to say that we couldn't go there in the future.
It's more like Uber Eats.
Yeah, exactly. So for right now we're focused on non-human payloads, but there's always room for opportunity in the future. So it's not a bad comparison at all. We really want to get your payload to space exactly when and where you want to get there. And from that standpoint, I think there's a lot of similarities to kind of that Uber model. And so we basically want to be the phone call that you make if you want to perform your mission in space. Who do you call? You call Spaceflight. Doesn't matter if you're a hosted payload customer looking to operate in orbit. It doesn't matter if you've got a 2,000 kilogram satellite that you want to get launched into orbit. You call Spaceflight. What our idea and what we try to bring to the marketplace is options, right? And that's what I mean by kind of the various payload sizes. We try to tailor our offerings depending on the customer need. And so that obviously means we need very broad access to launch vehicles. And we need a lot of experience in managing and executing missions all around the world. We have flown on 53 missions to date and launched 455 satellites to orbit.
Wow.
And so it's truly a great wealth of experience we have. And a lot of it you don't know until you actually go through it. One time, like, how do you get a satellite to India? It's not terribly easy, but once you've gone through it a few times, you have some kinks worked out. And so really what we're about here at Spaceflight, and again, kind of getting back to the idea of, a similarity to Uber, is we really want to offer the right option to our customer. And that might mean you've got a very large satellite and they're very specific on their timing. They can't deal with any other risks on the mission. And so for them, a dedicated launch might really be the right option for them. That might be the best fit. For another customer, they may be new to the marketplace. They don't have a whole lot of funds. So a rideshare mission, they may be more flexible on their launch timing. A rideshare mission might be a great option for them. It's really about tailoring our offerings to address customer needs. And that's really what we try to focus on around here, is giving the maximum amount of options to our customers is really what we're focused on.
All right. So tell us a bit about the Sherpa vehicle. What makes it unique for those, trying to get things into space?
I'm so excited you bring up Sherpa. It's an incredible piece of technology that really unlocks capabilities for our customers that we really didn't have an option for in the past. So kind of thinking about that same thought of offering options to our customers. They might not want to deal with a bus, a satellite bus. They might not have like any idea of how to deal with ground stations, but they've got this really cool payload they want to test on orbit. Sherpa is a great opportunity for them. We can host that hosted payload on board their payload and get them the data down that they want and need. They don't need to worry about building of a satellite bus. They don't need to deal with managing with the launch vehicle. They don't need to worry about how to get the data down. We can do that all for them. We have great partners and just an awesome engineering team that have put countless hours into breathing Sherpa into a reality. I remember when we first kind of dreamed up the idea of an orbital transfer vehicle, and to see it, to have 5 Sherpas up on orbit operating right now is pretty incredible. My thing I always talk about, where people say, "What is it that you do?" And I would always say, well, we manage customers from contract signing through launch. And now with Sherpa, I have to change that, because Sherpa is basically on-orbit operations. The mission doesn't end at launch. It doesn't end at deployment. There's maybe 6 months or a year of operations in orbit that we can offer now to our customers. And so, the Sherpa itself is an orbital transfer vehicle with a common core structure, but it can be heavily tailored depending on the need for each specific mission. So we have a couple different variants of them. There's the Sherpa FX, which is effectively a free flyer. You can host satellites on board and do deployments. There's the Sherpa AC, which is that same common core structure as Sherpa FX, but it offers attitude control. It offers power. It's a great vehicle if you've got a hosted payload who doesn't really need to change orbits, but just wants to operate on orbit for 6 to 10 months. We can do that with Sherpa AC. And then we have our chemical propulsive Sherpas, Sherpa LTE and Sherpa LTC. So we have one of each currently operating in orbit. It's very exciting. These are the types of vehicles where, let's say you've got a launch vehicle that drops you off at a certain altitude, but you want to go to another altitude. You want to be very precise, or you want to phase the orbit of your deployments. The Sherpa vehicles could do that for you. Instead of having to find multiple launches, you can use Sherpa to be able to do these different sorts of things in orbit for you. The last one I'll talk about is kind of the Sherpa ES vehicle, which is effectively Sherpa LTC, the chemical propulsive version on steroids. So it's just got far more propellant hosting capabilities. And so this is the Sherpa that we would use to get to geosynchronous orbits or cislunar orbits.
Oh, wow.
This is one that's super exciting for us. And I think, moreover, kind of the big takeaway is for us, the way that we look at Sherpa is it's really critical to addressing the market needs of the future, really where the industry is going. In-orbit servicing, access to geo and lunar orbits, and on-orbit operations. I mean, Sherpa is our way to be able to satisfy the needs of that market. So it's really critical for us in our future.
Okay, I'm going to dumb this right down for myself. This is how my head sees it. It's essentially a ready-to-go satellite, which people can kind of tailor to their own needs or their own project and put their own experiment within it, right? And the various options you've got can change orbit, or even, as you said, go all the way out to the moon if you really want to, right? That's what we're talking about. This isn't a rocket. This is something that sits on top of a rocket, or as part of many things that are sitting on top of a rocket that then gets deployed. That's how it is in basic terms, right? Have I nailed that?
That's exactly right. We still need the rockets. Our partnerships with launch vehicle providers are still critical to be able to get us to orbit to begin with. But from there, pretty much it's whatever your mission needs, Sherpa can do. You're exactly right. It is a highly tailorable, something that can happen in a very short timeline relative to what we normally would consider launch vehicle timelines. We can make changes, make modifications to really tailor our offering, tailor Sherpa exactly to what the customer needs. So it's very exciting.
Okay, so we've had a question come in literally very last minute from one of our Patreon subscribers, Don Irwin. He's been exploring your website, and this feels relevant here. First of all, he said he's also been looking at the careers part of your website because the company looks so good. I think that's a nice thing for you to be able to hear. But the question he's asked is, how are the spaceflight mission planners integrated with the launch vehicle company / agencies and the customers? What does a typical run-up period, launch, and handoff to the customer look like? That's quite a lot in there, but if you can give us like an overview of that would be great.
Sure. And I think I'm following the question. I'll try to cast a wide net and hopefully it'll answer the question. Generally, we start to engage with customers. It could be as early as L-18, 18 months, that is. It could be as late as L-6, L-4. My team, who are left to the mission execution phase, might kill me if I mention that we've done it before at something like L-4 months. But it requires a lot of work to be able to accommodate those sort of late additions to a mission. So we look for manifesting customers, again, around that L-12 month time period. The way that we have our missions team structured is we have a person within our team who is a person who manages the entire mission. That person is the one who engages with the launch vehicle provider. They're the ones working with the launch vehicle provider on a daily, weekly basis to talk about deliverables, to talk about timelines, launch date changes, those sorts of things. And within that, you can think about that mission. We have an engineering team who's supporting the creation of, let's say, a Sherpa vehicle for that mission or an adapter for that mission. They're all doing that sort of work on the timeline set forth by the launch vehicle provider. And then within that structure, there are also a set of mission managers. And those mission managers are working directly with the customer. What they're going to be doing is they're the day-to-day point of contact for a customer on that mission. So Customer has a question about the launch date, they can provide that along. They're the ones working with the customers on getting deliverables in on time and making sure that everyone is tracking to the same schedules set forth by the mission director. That's kind of the overall team structure. And then carry that forward. Integration at the launch site is, typically L-30, L-45 days from launch. And that's usually an opportunity where the mission directors, the people managing the missions, and the customer managers, the mission managers, will meet together at the launch site of the integration facility with the customer to do that integration of the customer, whether it's to a separation system or a deployment system, a deployer. And they'll then perform that integration, and then the handoff to the launch vehicle will happen sometime after that. Again, I hate to kind of speak in such wide timelines, but one of the things we talked about before is just it's heavily dependent on the launch vehicle and the mission. And as we've mentioned, it's kind of our calling card where we try to maximize those options. It means that we work with a bunch of different launch vehicle providers. And so those timelines are highly dependent on that launch vehicle provider. Some asking for more time, some asking for less.
Here's a follow-up. You guys are kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of things, or you're becoming one. Is it difficult to work with so many different companies and agencies and in different countries? Logistically, that if in my head, that would be a lot. That would be like kind of a nightmare. How do you guys do it?
It's a challenge. Every time that a new launch vehicle comes on the market, I think, great, another option for our customers. But I also think what that means for our team to manage. It means another new requirement set. Each launch vehicle has their own sets of requirements. They have their own sets of deliverables. They have different timelines. And I can't go to one launch vehicle provider and provide them exactly what I gave to another launch vehicle provider. It's not the way it works. And so logistically, it is very difficult to manage. The thing for spaceflight is over time, we've added more and more launch vehicles into our portfolio. And so every time we do it, we end up obviously getting smarter about how to integrate those sorts of things into our portfolio. We build out templates, we build out deliverables. Really what we try to do is, while it is very difficult for us, we try to make it look as seamless and as painless for our customers.
Yeah.
And that can be a challenge. But we've really been able to develop a little bit of a playbook over the years to help us manage all these different launch vehicles. One of the big things that we offer to our customers is remanifesting. That's kind of a part of what has to happen, whether it's a result of the launch vehicle being delayed or the customer being delayed. While it is very difficult to manage all of these additional launch vehicles, what that means is a relief valve in this scenario where there's a bad day. Let's say a launch vehicle has a failure. It happens, right? Space is hard. In that scenario, if we have other launch opportunities because of our wide LV partners that we have in the marketplace, we can offer another option to our customers. Say, hey, I know this one didn't work. They're going to be delayed 6 to 8 months, but guess what? We've got another launch going in 3 months. If you're willing to do it, here are the conditions associated with it. Do you want to pull the trigger and move forward with this mission? We can do that for you. Mm-hmm. And we only can do that because of all of the opportunities we have and because of the work that we've done in the past to set us up to be able to do those remanifesting changes. It is very difficult, but when you're able to actually get a customer launched after kind of, a launch vehicle bad day, or a customer's had a bad day and they can't just make a mission, it's really rewarding to be able to, to be there, integrating them and actually be happy about that. It's all kind of worth it in the end.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about this in terms of being able to remanifest a payload. That's pretty cool.
It really is critical to have options. It's one of the main reasons why when we talk about why would a customer come to spaceflight, generally the reason why you'd come to us is you'd rely on our experience. We have a lot of experience of how do you get to India, or I've got to get my shipment to Kodiak, Alaska. How do I do it? We've done it before. We know how to do it. But also, if you come to us, you're not booking directly with a launch vehicle provider. So we have options for you if you are not able to launch successfully, if your timeline changes, if their timeline changes. We have all of those other relationships that we can try to leverage to find a ride for you. Again, getting back to that theme of, exactly when and where you want to go. The when might change as the mission evolves, as we kind of liken to see. So it's really about options for our customers.
Yeah, you're not boxed in with one launch provider, are you? If
that's
one
right.
has a nightmare, there's other options.
That's exactly right. So that's been one of our main focuses, and it's one of the reasons why we're so excited to see all the new launch vehicle entrants coming into the market. We either are actively working on launches or are planning on it with many of those. And so it's a really exciting time to see the additional churn in the market and seeing all those additional launch vehicles come in. We're super excited to see what opportunities it presents for spaceflight and for our customers.
So I recently saw that you've personally been appointed to ComStack, which is the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee. Some of our listeners may have not heard about ComStack. So what is it and what does it do?
As you mentioned, recently appointed, it's a great opportunity. I think it's very humbling to be part of. When you look at some of the names across the advisory committee, I often think that maybe it was a mistake. When I first got a phone call from an individual at the FAA, it went through to like my Zoom answering machine that I have, because that was the number that was listed. I thought it was kind of a bogus call. And my general counsel at Spaceflight said, "Hey, did somebody reach out to you about this?" I was like, "Oh yeah." And they're like, "Well, this is real. You should give them a call back." So I did. And yeah, I ended up just earlier this year I got the letter saying that I had been accepted to the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee. So super exciting. For those who don't know, the committee was actually started in 1984. And really its main goal is to advise the FAA on space transportation. So for those who aren't familiar, if you're operating in the space domain in the US, there's a couple different regulatory bodies that you're going to be working with, probably more closely than others. For in-space comms, photographs, those sorts of things, it's FCC and NOAA. They're the ones who really dictate that space. For launch and launch operations, it's the FAA. That's their domain. And so obviously, one of the things that we're seeing, as I just mentioned, is a great deal of change in terms of the number of launch vehicle providers. We're seeing an increase there. We're seeing an increase in human space travel as well. And so I think it's a really exciting time to be involved with helping provide and helping shape some of the legislation that's out there related to the industry. I think it'll be really important for the industry to help talk a little bit about what help they need in making this a more accessible space, especially as it relates to, just kind of that rapid change in the industry. It's traditionally, I think, one of the things that it's been the most challenging for us at Spaceflight. Just speaking on Spaceflight's behalf, it's very hard to be able to negotiate through the different regulatory requirements. They're there for an important reason, but whatever we can do to try to make sure that we can safely manage those regulations while not purely stifling the industry, I think is really important for us to think about. As the industry continues to grow, as we continue to see more launch vehicle entrants come onto the market, and as human spaceflight becomes more real, it's incredible to see what's being done these days.
Absolutely is. Right. So there's obviously right now a lot of talk about Artemis and the debate over whether the high costs of these missions are sustainable. What can a company like Spaceflight add to an Artemis style mission? Is that something you'd like to do?
Whew. That's a great question. I'm sure, like many of your listeners, we were all up at various times of the day or night, depending on when it was going down, to watch the many attempts, but also the actual launch. I was on an airplane traveling back from Colorado, watching it on the plane Wi-Fi. And just kind of thinking like, it's happening. And I looked around, I'm like, why is this not on the airplane TV? But it was super exciting, especially considering I remember my time at ATK, we were just starting to work on the 5-segment solid rocket booster, which is what's featured on Artemis. So it was a very exciting time. I think certainly Artemis is meant for a different mission than what many of the commercial missions are. What I would say, in terms of how Spaceflight might work with something like that is, for the right customer, we're open and willing to kind of hear if this works for them. Really, we're here to address kind of the customer's needs in the market. And if there are customers and this is a viable opportunity for us, we would certainly look into it as an option. I think there's not a day that goes by that we don't think about what sort of launch vehicle pairings or opportunities might be beneficial to our customers and how we can secure that capacity and how we can work in that space. And so while Artemis might seem like or Artemis-like missions might seem like a long shot, I think we're more than willing to kind of look into it if there's a real customer need.
The other thing that's obviously a hot topic over the last few years is space debris and the huge amount of stuff we've now got going around our planet and further. Obviously, with the Sherpa vehicle, you have some control over some of the payloads that are in orbit or are in orbit. How important and how much are you looking at space debris and making sure that things are disposed of correctly once their life is finished in space?
Yeah, it's a great question, and certainly something that's very top of mind for us here at Spaceflight. One of our main goals here is to be good stewards of space. And part of that is deorbit. It's become a very important thing to discuss and to be involved with, considering the amount of the increase in the number of launches of satellites into orbit, right? Sherpa is a great way for us to be able to minimize some of that debris. So a great example of that would be, let's say you've got a customer who builds a satellite bus and they want to get launched on orbit, and they have a very specific mission. What you could do in that scenario is they could take their payload, put it on Sherpa. We could do that with several payloads, and instead of multiple buses operating in orbit, you could have one single bus operating in orbit, basically minimizing the amount of what eventually will become space debris. The other great benefit of Sherpa is the fact that we have a propulsion system on board. And so what this could do is, after our mission operations are complete, we could deorbit the vehicle to a safe orbit so that it does re-enter within a certain period of time. I think, again, most of your listeners are probably very familiar with the recent FCC notice that they're going to be shifting from a 25-year to a 5-year rule. which is pretty significant, and quite frankly, something that the industry has probably been looking at and has been on their radar for a number of years at this point. So it'll be important for customers to, as they work on applying for their licenses, to be cognizant of this. Sherpa is a way that we can help, whether it be in the future, docking operations, grabbing a hold of a satellite and being able to offer a service where we could deorbit that spacecraft on their behalf. That's another opportunity for Sherpa to be mindful of our place within the greater space domain and make sure that we're being those good stewards that we want to be. So not only making sure that our own vehicles are not contributing to space debris, but what else can we do for the industry to help make sure that space is sustainable for years to come?
And finally, before we went into this interview today, I was kind of thinking about how, the satellite industry has changed so much over the last 40 years. If you look at the 80s, for example, satellites were huge back then, like big, physically enormous, very expensive. A regular person like you and me, we couldn't afford probably to send something like that into space. It was usually the domain of NASA or the military or a very large corporate entity. Obviously, nowadays that's changed. You have people can send up payloads, all sorts of customers can send up payloads. So where do you see spaceflight, in 10 years? You're the company in 10 years and maybe 20 years. What trends do you see for payloads and payload delivery in the near and maybe the distant future?
Let me get my crystal ball out. As you pointed out, I 40 years, I feel like in 6 years, things have changed drastically. Launch costs, transporter has drastically changed the cost to get on orbit. And it really does enable, a new subset of customers who previously were unable to access space. Now they have access to it. So it's really incredible in the years that I've been working at Spaceflight to see how things have changed. If I were to think about spaceflight 10 to 20 years from now, what I would expect to see is, if I kind of have a vision, is a persistent network of Sherpa vehicles in orbit performing operations, whether that be fueling, space situational awareness, prox ops, boosting customers to unique orbits, really kind of a highway between LEO and cislunar orbits where Sherpa vehicles are traversing those orbits, delivering materials, hardware, fuel to customers, operating and doing all sorts of crazy things in orbits. Our thing at Spaceflight is not necessarily to do those things that those customers are trying to do at the orbit, but to provide them things that they need to be able to do that. Whether it's, again, a boost to that orbit, whether it's, hey, we need more fuel for this thing that's doing something in lunar orbit. We can get the fuel there for you so you can worry about your mission. It's not unlike what we talked about with hosted payload operations. It could be that you don't want to deal with building a satellite bus. You don't want to deal with getting the data down. You just want the data. We're here to be able to provide that solution to you. So yeah, I think, I know we talked about looking back 40 years. I'm super excited to see where the industry goes in 10 to 20 years time. I think we're really on the cusp of seeing some really great things and seeing massive change from a focus on low Earth orbit to some of the orbits like geo orbits and lunar orbits. I think is going to be really where the industry is moving and where it's going to move to, and really about supporting those operations out at those different points is really where spaceflight wants to go.
This is so fascinating. We've spoke to a few people recently where my mind just is getting blown by the prospects of what's coming up and where we're going to be in not that much time, which is crazy. Bear in mind, it felt like we were quite stagnant for quite a while. So thank you for sharing this with us and letting us know what you guys are doing. This has been really, really wonderful interview. So thank you very much, Tony. Thanks for joining us. And we'll keep our eyes peeled for further developments on what you're up to. And hopefully we'll see a lot more of your work up in orbit soon.
That's great. Yeah. So certainly it's been a pleasure to talk with you guys. And yeah, follow us. We're on Twitter. We've got lots of great content up there, and obviously our website as well, spaceflight.com. So thank you guys for the time today.
Thank you.
Fantastic, sports fans. It's trench time and market. Copy that.
I know I said it during the interview there, but this is blowing my mind. And it's another week where we've got a company on which is expanding what I thought was possible within the realm of space. we've essentially got a company who can take whatever you want and put it wherever you want, right up towards the moon. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's really awesome because before we did this interview, and I touched on it during the interview, I was thinking about how when I was growing up during the 80s, satellites were big. Like when you thought about a satellite, you thought about something gigantic.
Yeah, the size of a building.
Yeah, something like Hubble, something that was gigantic, billions, millions of dollars, very expensive, something usually that either a contractor made, and they had probably funds to build it. NASA had the contractor make it, or the military made it. You either had to have a space shuttle or a Titan or something big to get it up. And regular people couldn't just send up a satellite. Let's say I'm a scientist, hypothetically, or something. I couldn't just be like, man, I would like to design this instrument to send up into space to see what it's gonna, what it sees. You couldn't really do that. That there wasn't that capability back then because everything was just so big and expensive. And I feel like now companies like Spaceflight are enabling, regular people who don't have millions or billions of dollars to send up scientific instruments and payloads and things like that. And I feel like it's really opening space for regular folks, which is awesome. And I really think that's the way the future should be going. Not to say that, we shouldn't send up larger satellites that are capable of doing a lot of different things or anything like that. But I think the smaller sats are sort of the wave of the future, whereas, regular citizens can do stuff, which to me is really the point.
Yeah. Imagine being a science student now, perhaps doing a PhD or something like that. And it's not beyond the realms of possibility of getting a project in orbit at that level. And that's super inspiring. Like if I was a 15, 16-year-old kid now into science, I'd be thinking, wow, I can have something in the next few years that I'm working on going into space that's going to change something. Or, it just opens so many possibilities. And could we just give them some kudos for choosing such a cool company name?
Yes.
Imagine being called Spaceflight. Yeah, that's it's such a great name.
It is. It's just, hey, we do spaceflight. That's, to me, it's like perfect. It's very it's simple. It's to the point. It's very like, hey, this is what we do. I think it's a great name for a company. Full disclosure, the company that I work with, Celestis, we have worked with them.
I didn't know that. When I booked this, I didn't know that. Oh, that's amazing.
We are doing next year's Excelsior flight with them, and we've already delivered the payload to them.
Oh, wow.
So they already have. But I remember seeing the pictures and everything from them, and I was like, man, I love their. And I'm not just saying this because my company's worked with them. I want to make this very clear that I have no financial. Doing this podcast isn't it's not
sponsored or anything like that. Yeah, it was just this.
We're not sponsoring.
I generally had no idea when I arranged this interview that was the case. Yeah, there we go.
Not a conflict of interest, or anything like that. They're not paying me or anything to be like, oh yeah, I think it's great. They're not paying me some special fee under the table. But I saw the pictures and I was like, man, I love the imagery surrounding this company. It's just like, hey, we do space.
Yeah.
I like the idea of accessibility for regular people to space nowadays, because like I said, growing up in the 80s, we had the space shuttle, which was awesome. But back then it was like the realm of regular, people being able to send stuff to space was just not something that was possible back then. I look at it now, like if you look at the first satellite that America ever sent to space, Explorer 1, had a little instrument by University of Iowa, right? James Van Allen, that was a little satellite, not very big. If you see diagrams of it, it's surprising how small it was because it was such a big deal.
Yeah.
It was such a big achievement. But that little scientific package that Van Allen sent up with his people, it discovered how extensive the radiation belts were. That was a big discovery back then. That was one of the biggest scientific discoveries of probably the 20th century, and it was accomplished by this little instrument. So to me, that really speaks to how smaller satellites and how sort of more independent researchers really have a huge impact on spaceflight. And to me, Van Allen is like the ultimate example because this wasn't like a famous dude at the time. He was, a professor at the University of Iowa, very humble, not somebody who courted the limelight. And that small package and that little experiment really revolutionized science. And I think now we're developing the capability. We can have tons of people just like Van Allen, who are making discoveries like that.
It's like we've almost gone full circle with it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that, but I think that's awesome because I think that I keep coming back to the word accessibility, and I love that because I feel like humanity got away from that over time. I think during the 80s, I've done a little bit of talking to people who are around during that time who were involved in commercial space flight. And back then, they were like, why don't we just have small sats that regular people can send up things in? But no, back then, everything was huge. Everything was like this big, these giant satellites that took several astronauts to maintenance and orbit and just expensive, bigger, everything was just very 1980s mentality. Very 1980s. Everything was big. I think nowadays it's going in the opposite direction of, okay, now we have a capability where we can send things that are a little, less crazy into space they might not be serviceable, but they're more user-friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I used to love those images of the big satellites coming out the cargo bay doors of a space shuttle. But you're right, that doesn't make it as accessible as it should be. So as always, the full video of that video will be on our Patreon page, patreon.com/space and things. And if you want to find out more about Spaceflight, check the show notes, and we'll have links to all their social media accounts and their website, so you can go and check them out yourself.
Well, don't move it till I see it. It's all over. Orange. Don't move it till I see it. I've stirred it up with my feet. Hey, it is. I can see it from here. It's orange. Wait a minute, let me put my visor up. It's still orange. Sure it is.
So, Emily, was there anything that we didn't talk about before we both went away, which you think we may have neglected?
I'm just going to keep this very brief. Navy football released, the Naval Academy in Annapolis released their new uniforms. And oh my God, I watched that commercial for it about 500 times since yesterday. They are NASA themed. I'm a little biased. I'm ex-Navy. These uniforms are just flipping amazing. They're by Under Armour. Like I said, they're space themed, and they have From the Sea to the Stars written on the back of the helmet. And They have Bruce McCandless II hand painted on the helmets.
That's amazing.
And Bruce McCandless II is probably one of the most famous Naval Academy grads. And obviously he's the real Buck Rogers. We've had his son. We've had Bruce McCandless III on our show. Great friend of the podcast. Hi, Bruce. He probably is listening to this right now. Yeah, when I saw that, one of my Navy friends messaged that to me, and I just about had a cardiac arrest in my condo. I almost just about died. I want every dang thing. I'm trying not to cuss here because I'm so excited. I want to buy everything from that Under Armour line. I mean, it's just, woo! It is just hot. So I'm just putting that out there. Yeah, so that's the energy I'm going to be manifesting for the next few weeks, pretty much.
Nice. Well, I will put a link to the advertisement in the show notes so other people can go and have a look at what you're on about. Funny that Bruce gets mentioned there because I'm hopefully meeting him in Austin next week.
Awesome.
So potentially as the day this podcast comes out, I can't remember the exact date, but anyway, that's pretty cool. So we got an email, Emily, from the good people at Johns Hopkins University about something which I think is pretty cool. So there's a new this may have been posted on Hipsters, I'm not sure. If it hasn't, it should be. There is a new interactive map which offers the ability to scroll through the universe. So again, there's a video explaining how this all works, which I will put in the show notes. But all you have to do is go to mapoftheuniverse.net, where you can download it for free and explore this interactive map. So it depicts the actual position and real colors of 200,000 galaxies.
What?
Yep, it's been created by Johns Hopkins University astronomers with data mined over 2 decades by the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. And this map allows the public to experience data previously only accessible to scientists. I think this is so cool. Here's a quote from the... So here's a quote So here's a quote from the map creator, Bryce Menard, who is a professor at Johns Hopkins. He says, "Growing up, I was very inspired by astronomy pictures, stars, nebulae, and galaxies. And now it's our time to create a new type of picture to inspire people. Astrophysicists from around the world have been analysing this data for years, leading to thousands of scientific papers and discoveries. But nobody took the time to create a map that is beautiful, scientifically accurate, and accessible to people who are not scientists. Our goal here is to show everybody what the university really looks like." I think this is amazing.
I used to have this image, I want to say it was of the observable universe, and I had it as my wallpaper for like ages. And I think it was put together by a bunch of like different observatories and stuff, what they believe the universe looks like, and I had it, like I said, I had it as my wallpaper, sort of as a reminder, like you're about this big, not very big. Yeah. And I love the idea that there's like this new way to sort of walk through that image that's sort of interactive, that's sort of immersive, because I don't think, I'm not a scientist, but I love, I like visually to be able to wrap my head around stuff and sort of be like, okay, this is what this really appears like. So I think that's amazing. I'm amazed that we even have the technology to do this stuff. Like, what a time to live in.
I know, right? Yeah. I'm hoping it's something they keep updating as well as these things change, because obviously we're learning about this stuff every day, especially with JWST up there.
Yes. I forgot what I was reading this week, but it was an astronomy article, and it was basically talking about JWST is really just turning a lot of stuff on its head. It very much like Hubble did almost 30 years ago when we started getting the first good Hubble images, and people were like, okay, this changes a lot of stuff that we previously thought. And now it's the same thing is happening again. I just love that every generation we kind of have these successive innovations that really change what we think about just not just the universe, but our circumstances here.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something I feel like we neglected last week. I think this is really cool. Links are in the show notes, and I think everyone should go and check it out.
I've never put a flag up in the moon before. What? Pull that in.
That's all we have for you this week. We hope you enjoyed our podcast and hope that you might want to keep on listening and sharing with your friends. If you're in our Patreon, then I'm hoping to have shared some photos and maybe some videos from my travels across the US and all the air and space museums I'm hoping to visit. If anyone wants to sign up, you can go back and look at all the previous content we've posted. It's a pretty good deal if you ask me. Head over to patreon.com/space and things.
I'm a little biased, but I agree completely. I think you get a pretty good deal out of it. Thank you for listening. We really do appreciate it. We do hope that over the next few weeks, you find your own ways to mark the 50th anniversary of Apollo 17, the final Apollo moon landing. But don't forget, in space, no one can hear you me.
Space and Things has been brought to you by And Things Productions.